The large hall was filled with powerful people, shiny cameras, and nervous reporters. It was a big tech and leadership summit held in Delhi. The stage was wide and full of international flags. Many well-known leaders were present, but the main guests were Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Google CEO Sundar Pichai. Everyone was excited. The audience waited for wisdom, inspiration, and big announcements. The room buzzed with whispers as Modi entered quietly, his presence calm and focused. Sundar followed beside him, simple and humble as always, wearing his usual plain suit and soft smile. There were no extra guards or loud music. Their entrance was peaceful, but powerful. But not everyone in the room respected that peace. A man sitting near the front row whispered to another guest. His voice was not soft. His words were not kind. He said, "They invite a politician too. A tech event. What's next? Calling a farmer to teach coding." He smirked, trying to sound smart. The guest next to him looked uncomfortable. Some others heard it too, and turned their faces away. The man didn't stop there. When Modi walked to the podium to begin his speech, the man said loudly, "Maybe we should keep the politics out of progress." A few people laughed nervously. Some didn't react. But the words had fallen like a stone in a calm pond. The ripples had begun. Modi heard it. He paused for a moment, but didn't react. His face remained calm, his hands steady. He simply looked at the audience and began with a soft namaste. Sundar Pichai heard it too. He noticed the disrespect. But he also noticed something else. The pain in Modi's eyes that he tried so hard to hide. Sundar's heart felt heavy. It wasn't the first time he had seen people judge leaders without understanding them. He himself had faced it in his early life, when people laughed at his English, or his thin shirt, or his South Indian accent. He knew how such moments felt. Quiet insults often left the deepest wounds. As Modi began speaking, he talked not about politics, but about dreams. He spoke about young minds, digital India, and the importance of respect and leadership. He didn't attack anyone. He didn't raise his voice. But his words carried a strength that filled the room. True progress, he said, comes when we build, not break, when we listen, not shout, when we grow, not mock. The room became still. Even the man who had spoken earlier shifted in his seat. The cameras zoomed in on Modi's face. But it was Sundar. They should have been watching, because Sundar was already planning something. Something kind. Something that would leave the room completely silent, in the most beautiful way. After Modi's speech, it was Sundar's turn to speak. As he walked toward the stage, he looked directly at the man in the front row. He didn't show anger. He didn't speak loudly. He just nodded, and then looked away. What Sundar did next would make headlines. But it didn't begin with words. It began with a story. And not just any story. His mother's story. Sundar started slowly. "When I was a child," he said, "we didn't have a refrigerator. Sometimes, my mother would walk 3 streets just to get ice for my father's medicine. She never asked for praise. She just did what was needed. Today, she doesn't sit in the front row. She doesn't wear a badge. But to me, she's a leader." The room leaned in. He continued, "Today I stand beside Prime Minister Modi, not because of his title, but because I've seen how far he's walked. I know what it means to come from a small town, to face doubters, to be laughed at for your dreams." He paused. His voice didn't rise, but his words carried weight. We cannot move forward by stepping over those who helped build the road. Sundar then looked at Modi with quiet respect. "I'm not here to defend anyone," he said, "because real respect needs no defense. It shows in how we treat those we don't agree with." There was no clapping yet, no cheering, just silence, deep, thoughtful silence. The man in the front row shifted again, his hands folded, his face turned downward. It was as if Sundar's words had wrapped around the whole room and pressed gently on every heart, And then Sundar said one last thing. Greatness doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes, it just stays calm. And with that, he sat down. Modi looked at him. Their eyes met. There was no smile, no handshake, no words exchanged, just understanding. Deep, silent understanding. And in that moment, no one in the room made a sound. Not the cameras, not the whispers, not even the man who had disrespected. Because Sundar's kindness had done something power never could. It had made the whole room quiet. And this was just the beginning. The next morning, the entire country was talking about what had happened at the summit. News channels repeated Sundar Pichai's soft words again and again. Social media was flooded with clips of him saying, "Greatness doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes, it just stays calm." Many people felt emotional watching the video. Some wrote long messages about how kindness is the strongest reply. Others shared how they had never seen such quiet respect on such a big stage. But while the world was reacting with praise and wonder, inside the hall where it all happened, something else was going on. The man who had spoken badly the day before. His name was Ramesh Gupta. He was not just a random guest. He was a senior official from a big tech company in India. He had always believed that politics should stay far from technology. He thought leaders like Modi didn't understand the fast world of data, coding, and machines. When he had made that comment, he didn't think it would matter. But now, his words had become a shadow behind Sundar's bright speech, and he was not proud of it. Ramesh sat in his office, alone, rewatching the video. He had heard Sundar's story about his mother before, but this time, it felt different. This time, he felt like it was told directly to him. His heart felt heavy. He thought of his own father, who had worked as a postman. He remembered how people used to laugh at their clothes in school. Somewhere along the way, he had become one of those people, laughing at others. His phone buzzed. It was a message from the summit organizers. They wanted a written apology. Ramesh looked at the screen. He felt ashamed. Not because he had to say sorry, but because he hadn't seen the pain behind Modi's calm eyes until Sundar pointed it out. He decided he wouldn't just write an apology, he would do something more. Meanwhile, Sundar Pichai sat quietly in a guest house, away from cameras and noise. He wasn't reading headlines or checking social media. Instead, he was writing a letter, not an email, not a post, but a real handwritten letter. He addressed it to someone no one expected. He wrote to Modi's mother. He had read about her strength and simplicity many times. She had passed away some time ago, but Sundar still felt it was right to send words of respect. He wrote, "Dear Ma, of a leader who stayed calm, your son taught the world how silence can speak louder than shouting. He reminded all of us that true strength is quiet and patient. He showed kindness, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Thank you for raising a man who believes more in unity than revenge." He folded the letter gently and placed it beside a small flower near a photo of her that was on display at the Summit Guest Lounge. That moment of quiet honor would never be seen on TV, but it would reach Modi's heart. That evening, Prime Minister Modi was reading through his messages. He came across a photo. It was of Sundar's letter, placed by his mother's image. He held the phone for a long time. His fingers did not move. His eyes became wet. He remembered his mother's hands, rough from work, soft with love. She had taught him to walk with his head high, but his heart low, never above others, always grounded. He had been insulted many times in life, but never before had someone replied to that insult with such gentle power. He looked out the window. He whispered, "Thank you, Sundar." The next day, the summit held a smaller private session. This was not for cameras. It was for deeper discussions. Sundar and Modi were both invited, but this time, so was Ramesh Gupta. When he walked into the room, some people looked at him with cold eyes. They had seen the video. They knew what he had said, but Ramesh didn't avoid it. He walked to the front and stood beside the microphone. He took a breath. Yesterday, he said, I used words that were full of pride. I forgot that respect is not about titles, but about journeys. I misjudged a leader, and I forgot where I myself came from. His voice shook. My father carried mail in the hot sun. He never raised his voice. I realize now that Modi ji reminds me of him. There was silence. And to Sundar, sir, he continued, thank you. Your kindness didn't just make the room quiet. It made my heart quiet too. The room remained still. Modi nodded gently. Sundar smiled, not proudly, but humbly. Then something surprising happened. Modi stood up, walked to the stage, and held Ramesh's hand. He didn't say a word, but in that quiet moment, 1,000 wounds were healed. Not just for them, but for everyone watching. It was no longer about power. It was about understanding outside. The sun was setting. Light poured through the tall glass windows of the summit center. Reporters were still waiting. They didn't know what had just happened inside, but they would feel the effect soon, because real change doesn't always come with headlines. Sometimes, it walks in silence and changes everything. The summit was now in its third day. Outside the large building, people gathered with banners, phones, and hopeful eyes. Some came just to see Sundar Pichai. Some came to see Modi. Others simply wanted to feel inspired. But inside, something deeper was unfolding. Something that was not being reported on television. Inside the private lounge. After the apology from Ramesh Gupta, a calm stillness settled in the air. People were talking less and listening more. Even the young interns and junior tech workers had started whispering words like respect and humility to one another. A change was happening, and it was slow, but real. Modi sat quietly near the window. He was sipping plain tea, not surrounded by bodyguards or staff. Sundar sat across from him, writing something in a small notebook. Both men were silent, not because they had nothing to say, but because they were thinking deeply. After a few minutes, Sundar looked up. Double quotes, sir, he said softly. I hope yesterday's moment gave you peace. Modi looked at him and smiled gently. Sundar, peace doesn't come from what others say, he replied. It comes from knowing that you stayed true to yourself. He took another sip of tea and continued. I didn't feel hurt by Ramesh's words. I felt sad because I saw a man forgetting his own past. Sundar nodded slowly. Do you think he really changed? Sundar asked. Modi placed the cup down and said, sometimes, a single moment can open a closed door. Whether he walks through, it is up to him. Later that day, a surprise announcement came from the summit committee. They had added a new session called Leaders of Kindness, the Power of Gentle Voices. The topic was unexpected in a tech summit. No machines, no data, no charts. Just people sharing stories of patience, respect, and emotional strength. When the session began, the hall was half full. Many people thought it would be boring, but within 20 minutes, every seat was taken. People sat on stairs. Some stood in the back. Others watched from outside on screens. Modi was invited to speak again. This time, he didn't bring notes. He walked to the stage, looked at the crowd, and simply said, we are taught that strong people never break. But real strength is not about being unbreakable. It is about healing without hurting others. He paused. Then he added, we cannot build a better world if we keep breaking people in the process. His words were not loud, but they carried weight. A few people in the front row had tears in their eyes. Not because they were sad, but because someone was finally speaking the truth. Truth that often stays hidden behind pride and big titles. After Modi stepped down, Sundar was invited again. This time, he didn't tell a story about his past. Instead, he invited someone else to the stage. I would like to call up a woman who reminded me yesterday what true kindness looks like, he said. A woman stood up from the back row. She wore a simple sari. She looked unsure, her hands shaking. Sundar held her arm gently and walked her to the microphone. "This is Meenakshi," he said. "She is a cleaning staff member here. Yesterday, she saw that my water bottle was almost empty. I didn't ask for help, but she noticed, and without saying a word, she walked across the room, refilled it, and placed it back before I even realized." The hall went silent. Sundar looked at everyone and said, "Kindness is not always big. It is sometimes just a quiet act that nobody sees, but it matters." He turned to Meenakshi and said, "You may not wear a suit, but you are a leader to me." The whole room stood up, not just the audience. Even Modi stood, even the journalists, even the security guards. Meenaksh. I had tears in her eyes. Her lips trembled, and all she could say was, "Thank you." The applause lasted longer than any tech speech in the summit. After that day, something strange began to happen. Staff started helping one another more. Big leaders began speaking more softly. Young students started looking up to people like Meenakshi. Ramesh Gupta returned to his company and gave a speech to his team, not about numbers or reports, but about his father and how he once delivered mail during heavy rains just to feed his children. "We forget the hands that built us," he said, but this week, I remembered. His team gave him a long round of applause. Not for being the boss, but for being honest. On the final day of the summit, Modi and Sundar were invited to give closing words together. They stood side by side on the stage, looking out at the crowd that had changed so much in just a few days. Modi began, "We started this summit talking about technology. We ended talking about humanity. And that is the real progress." Sundar added, "We have built machines to answer fast. Now let us build hearts that listen slow." The hall was silent again, not because people were bored, but because they were touched. Then something unexpected happened. A child, around 10 years old, walked up to the stage with a drawing. He handed it to Sundar. It showed Sundar and Modi holding hands, and behind them, the word kind. No loud speeches, no big drama, just a child reminding everyone what really matters. The whole room smiled. Some wept, because kindness, when shown with honesty, makes even the busiest rooms quiet. And that quietness is more powerful than any microphone. News of the summit's final day spread like fire. Not because of a tech announcement, not because of a business deal, but because of a child's drawing. The image of Modi and Sundar, pichai holding hands, with the word kind written behind them, was shared across every platform. The boy's name was Arjun. He was the son of a school teacher from Jaipur. No one had expected him to walk up to the stage. No one had told him to do it. He had done it from the heart. Arjun's mother later said, "He told me in the morning, 'Mama, I want to thank the kind men on stage.'" Within hours, Arjun's picture was on every news channel. People across India, and even around the world, shared the drawing and wrote about the summit that changed everything. But something more important was happening quietly behind the scenes. Ramesh Gupta had changed, not in words, but in action. He started walking into his office each morning with a small smile and no phone in his hand. He spoke to the receptionist by name. He thanked the cleaning staff. He even sat with his junior team members for lunch, listening to their stories, not talking about himself. His wife noticed the change too. "You are softer now," she said one evening. He smiled and replied, "I was always soft inside. I just forgot to show it." His company soon introduced a new policy called Respect First. It focused on how employees treated each other, not just how they performed. Ramesh told everyone, "We can fix a broken machine faster than a broken heart." Back in Delhi, Sundar Pichai was preparing to return to California. His work schedule was full, as always. Meetings, reports, travel, decisions. But this time, something had changed in him too, before leaving. He made a private visit to a school on the outskirts of the city. It was a government school, with limited resources. Old fans spun slowly on the ceiling, and the paint on the walls was fading, but the students were full of dreams. Sundar sat with them on the floor. No press, no cameras, just simple questions and honest answers. A girl named Pretty asked, "Sir, how do you stay calm when people are not nice to you?" Sundar smiled and said, "When someone throws mud, I choose not to throw it back. Because if I do, both of us stay dirty." The children laughed, but they also understood deeply. While Sundar visited the school, Modi was meeting a group of village leaders in a quiet corner of the capital. They spoke about development and progress, but one man raised his hand and said something unexpected. "Modi ji," he said, "these days everyone is talking about your calm face. People are saying you did not get angry when insulted. How do you do that?" Modi thought for a moment. Then he said, "When you are carrying water in a pot on your head, you walk carefully, not because of fear, but because you don't want to waste what you carry. I carry the trust of 1 billion people. I cannot spill it with anger." The room became silent. The leaders nodded. Modi added, "Some people shout to be heard. One choose to whisper with action." The Prime Minister's team suggested sharing these words as a video online, but Modi refused. "No," he said, "let the words stay where they belong, in the hearts of those who listened." Meanwhile, back at the airport, Sundar was ready to board his flight. Just before leaving, a young man ran toward him holding a folder. Sir, please, wait," the boy shouted. Security guards stepped forward, but Sundar raised his hand gently to stop them. The boy reached him, out of breath. "My name is Shivam," he said. "I'm a computer science student. This is not a resume. This is a letter." He handed over the folder. Sundar opened it. Inside was a simple message. "Dear Sundar, sir, I wanted to become a powerful man before. Now I want to become a kind man. Because of you." There were no fancy words, no long stories, just truth. Sundar looked at the boy and nodded. "You're already on the right path," he said. He shook his hand, then boarded the flight. As the plane took off, Sundar looked out of the window. The city below became smaller and smaller, but the moments he had lived in the past few days grew larger in his heart. He thought of Arjun's drawing. He thought of Meenakshi's quiet act of kindness. He thought of Modi's calm face, and he thought of how one small act of respect had started a wave. In homes across India, people began talking differently. Parents told their children, "Be smart like Sundar, but also be kind." Teachers showed the summit video and said, "This is what true strength looks like." Young people in colleges started talking about the power of gentleness. They began calling it the silence movement. A new kind of leadership was being born, not through power, but through presence. 1 week later, a short message appeared on Sundar Pichai's official page. It read, "To all those who sent me messages, thank you. I cannot reply to every word, but I feel every emotion. Let us not wait for a stage or a camera to show kindness. Let us begin at home, at work, in silence." A few hours after that, Modi shared something too, a photo of his late mother, and a quote, "My mother taught me that staying silent when insulted is not weakness. It is a gift you give to yourself." These were not just social media posts, they were seeds, and they were falling into hearts across the world, because silence, when filled with kindness, can change everything, even a room full of noise. In the days that followed the summit, something unexpected began to spread, not like a breaking news story or a scandal, but like a quiet wind moving through people's hearts. It started with a school in Kerala. A teacher played Sundar Pichai's speech to her class of 9th grade students. She paused at the moment. He said, "Real respect needs no defense. It shows in how we treat those we don't agree with." She asked the students, "How would you answer someone who mocks your family or your dreams?" A boy raised his hand and said, "I would tell them kindly that I come from strength, not shame. The whole class clapped, not because the boy was loud, but because he was honest. In a small village near Patna, a father and son watched Modi's speech replay on a black and white television. The son was preparing for his first job interview. In the city, he had always been shy. He often lowered his eyes when people spoke rudely. After watching Modi stay calm despite insult, he turned to his father and said, "I don't have to argue to prove myself right." The father smiled, patted his shoulder, and replied, "No, beta. You just have to walk forward without losing your respect." Even in corporate offices, people were talking. A top manager at a tech firm in Bengaluru wrote an internal message to all teams. He shared the story of Ramesh Gupta's apology and the rise of the respect first policy. He ended the message with this line, "Remember, we build products with code, but we build culture with kindness." Soon, the summit organizers announced something special. They were launching a new annual event within the main tech conference. It would be called Voices of Grace. This event would honor people from any field who had changed lives through humility, kindness, or quiet leadership. No big awards, no cash prizes. Just recognition and respect. The first name nominated, Meenakshi, the cleaning worker who refilled Sundar's water bottle without being asked. Her name appeared on posters, and her smile lit up the stage. Reporters asked how she felt. She said only one thing, "I didn't do anything big. I just did what my heart told me." And that one line touched millions. Sundar Pichai from his California office received a video of Meenakshi accepting her honor. He watched it 3 times. In a quiet voice, he told his assistant, "This is the future of leadership, not in suits, but in service." He then wrote a message to his global team at Google. "Let us remember," he said, "that progress is not just in speed, but in softness. When we walk forward with gentle steps, we leave deeper footprints." Back in Delhi, Prime Minister Modi was invited to speak at a university graduation. The students were loud and excited. Some carried signs that read "Build with grace and lead with kindness." As Modi stepped onto the stage, the cheering stopped. The students waited. He looked at them and began softly, "Many people think silence is empty, but silence is where the strongest voices are born." He spoke of Sundar, of Arjun, the boy with the drawing of Meenakshi, and even of Ramesh Gupta. "We all make mistakes," he said, "but kindness gives us a way back." After the speech, a group of students walked up to him. One of them, a girl named Kavya, said, "Sir, we want to start a club called the Calm Circle. We'll meet every week to talk, not to argue, to listen, not just speak." Modi smiled and said, "Then India is in good hands." As the message of kindness spread, the world took notice. A news channel in London aired a special story called The Power of Quiet. It featured clips from the summit, the apology, the drawing, and the speech. One journalist said, "We often look for strength in noise. But India just reminded us that true strength sometimes walks in silence." In Japan, school children sent letters to Sundar Pichai and Modi. Their teacher had translated the speeches into Japanese. One letter said, "Dear Sundar, you showed us that kindness can be the strongest language. Even when we don't speak the same words, we feel it in the heart." All of this began from one moment when a man spoke rudely and another man chose not to fight back. That one decision became a mirror. It showed everyone something different. For some, it reflected their own pride. For others, their patience. But for all, it became a moment of learning. Ramesh Gupta, who had once started the chain of events with a careless comment, now began visiting colleges to speak, not about his success, but about his mistakes. At one event, he said, "When I was younger, I thought being loud made me smart. Now I know wisdom wears a soft voice." He told students, "We all want to be seen, but we must first learn to see others." His words were honest, and the students listened. Some hugged him afterward, One evening, Arjun, the boy who made the famous drawing, was invited to a school function. The theme was heroes of our time. He was asked, "Why did you draw the word kind behind those two men?" He thought for a moment, then said, "Because I think both of them carry it on their back, like a superhero cape, but invisible." The crowd laughed with love, and so the wave of kindness continued. It moved from stage to school, from offices to villages. From leaders to children, not by force but by example, not in shouts, but in silence, because sometimes the softest voices travel the farthest. A month had passed since the summit. The noise of the world returned, fast news, rushing cities, loud opinions. But something had quietly changed in people's hearts. The kindness that began with a calm face and a quiet reply had grown into a movement that no one expected. It wasn't a trending hashtag anymore. It was a practice. In homes, offices, classrooms, and even government buildings, people had started pausing before reacting. They were asking themselves, "Can I answer with grace instead?" In New York, during a global tech and culture event, Sundar Pichai was invited to speak again. His speech was supposed to focus on innovation, artificial intelligence, and data systems. But as he stood on stage, holding his notes, he looked out at the large audience and paused. He folded the notes slowly and said, "I was going to talk about the future of machines today, but I think it's time we speak about the future of hearts." The audience became still. Sundar continued, "In Delhi, at a leadership summit, something powerful happened. Not a new tool, not a new app, but a moment of silence that taught us everything." He shared the full story. The comment, Modi's silence, the apology, the cleaning lady, the boy's drawing, and the wave that followed. "I realized," he said, "the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more understanding. More eyes that see, more ears that listen, and more hands that help." As he finished, the room rose to its feet. Not in a burst of noise, but in a quiet, full standing applause. In India, Prime Minister Modi watched the video from his office. He didn't call for cameras. He didn't post a tweet. He simply sat back, closed his eyes, and let a soft smile touch his face. He then picked up a pen and began writing in his personal journal, something he rarely shared with the public. He wrote, "The world teaches us to win through power, but I've seen now, the gentlest path wins the deepest trust." The very next week, the Voices of Grace event launched officially. It had guests from over 30 countries, people from every background, teachers, nurses, delivery workers. Even prison guards were honored for one thing, choosing kindness when they could have chosen something else. Nanak, Shai, the woman who had refilled Sundar's water bottle, was given the stage again. This time, she spoke with more confidence, more light in her eyes. "My hands are used to cleaning," she said, "but that day, I cleaned the doubt from someone's heart. I didn't know it would go so far." Her words brought people to tears. Even Ramesh Gupta, now a different man, stood beside her on stage and offered her flowers. He bowed gently, not just with his head, but with his soul. "You reminded me that respect doesn't come with position," he said. "It comes with intention." In classrooms across India, the story of that summit was added to moral science books under a new lesson titled, "The Day Silence Spoke Louder Than Words." Students were asked to write essays on what they would do if someone insulted their family or beliefs. One student wrote, "I will answer like Modi ji, with stillness, and like Sundar sir, with a story." A quiet award was created in Arjun's name, the boy who drew the famous picture. It was called the Kind Hand Award, and it would be given every year to children who performed kind acts without being asked. The first winner was a girl named Alicia, who started a free reading group in her village under a tree. She said, "I want to grow books in people's hearts." The media continued to cover other stories, politics, markets, sports, scandals. But in homes, where parents raised children and teachers shaped minds. The story of that summit never faded, because the world had seen something rare, not anger, not revenge, not speeches full of pride, but patience, humility, respect, kindness. Kindness. Years later, Sundar Pichai would speak at another large event. By then, technology had changed, and artificial intelligence had reached new heights. But his words remained the same. "We have trained machines to speak," he said. "Now it is time we train ourselves to listen." He paused and smiled. If we want to build a future worth living in, we must remember how that future begins, not with louder voices, but with kinder ones. Modi, older now, gave fewer public speeches. But when he did speak, people listened, more carefully than ever. Not because his voice was louder, but because it carried something deeper, the calmness of a man who had walked through insult without throwing a single stone back. One day, a little boy in a remote village, holding a pencil and a notebook, asked his grandmother, Dottie, who was Sundar Pichai. She smiled and said, "He was a man who showed the world that kindness can stop noise." The boy thought for a while, then asked, "And who was Modi?" The grandmother placed her hand on his head and said, "He was a man who showed that silence can speak." And that is how the story lived on. Not in history books, but in how people treated each other. In how they replied to anger with calm. In how they chose grace over pride. Because in the end, it wasn't the comment that people remembered. It wasn't the insult. It was the quiet reply, and the kindness that followed, that silence. It made the whole world quiet, and in that quiet, they finally listened. Years passed, but the memory of that summit never faded. Not because it was a big event, but because it became the seed of something timeless, in cities and villages. People still spoke about the day a man insulted a prime minister, and how the reply did not come through anger, but through silence and kindness. But there was still one person whose journey was not complete. Ramesh Gupta. Ramesh had changed in many ways. He had spoken to universities. He had trained his team to work with respect. He had apologized again and again. But in his heart, he still carried something heavy, regret, not guilt, not shame, just a simple wish to say thank you. Properly, he had never spoken directly to Modi after that summit, and even though he had stood beside Meenakshi and honored her and supported the new generation, he still felt that he had not yet closed the circle. So, one morning, he made a decision. He would write a letter. "Dear Prime Minister, you may not remember me by face, but you remember my words, because they were unkind. I was the man who mocked you that day on stage. I was the man who forgot that strength often looks like silence. You never scolded me. You never answered in anger. You just looked at me, and you stayed calm. That calmness entered me like a mirror. It showed me who I was becoming. Since then, I have tried to live differently. I teach now. I speak. I listen. I still make mistakes, but I no longer defend them with pride. Sir, this is not a request. It is not a favor. It is a final thank you from a man who once raised his voice to a leader, who chose not to raise his own. Yours, Ramesh Gupta." He didn't know if the letter would ever reach Modi, but he sent it anyway. Weeks passed. One day, a plain envelope arrived at Ramesh's home. Inside was a single handwritten note. "Dear Ramesh, I remember your words, but I remember your change more. We are all students of life, and life is most beautiful when we stay open to learning. Thank you for learning. Thank you for teaching others. You didn't just change your path, you helped many others walk with you. That is the mark of a true leader, with respect. Narendra Modi." Ramesh sat with the letter in his lap for a long time, his eyes filled, not because he had been forgiven, but because he had been understood. On the other side of the world, Sundar Pichai stood on a quiet hill in California. No media, no speech. He was planting a tree, something he did every year on his birthday. This year, he tied a small tag around the young plant. The tag read, to the voice that did not rise, and the silence that lifted us all. A child walked by and asked, "What does that mean?" Sundar bent down and smiled. "It means, sometimes the people who don't shout are the ones who help the world hear better." Years later, the story became a short film made by a group of young Indian filmmakers. It had no loud music, no dramatic scenes, just soft piano sounds, quiet moments, and simple truths. It was called "The Room Became Quiet." A line from the film became famous around the world. The world changed, not when people shouted, but when they finally listened. And so, the kindness kept walking. It moved from mouths to hands, from screens to streets, from leaders to common people. It was no longer just about Modi, or Sundar Pichai, or Ramesh, or Meenakshi, or Arjun. It became about everyone. A teacher who forgave a student, a driver who helped a stranger, a boss who said thank you and meant it, a child who chose to hug instead of argue, because sometimes kindness doesn't shout, it walks quietly, and when it walks long enough, the world follows quietly, but surely.